This month at the Diplomacy, Law and Policy Forum, we are looking at the historic regime of law, Islamic law, and contemporary international humanitarian law to gauge where they overlap and diverge. This video will focus on areas in which they diverge, and the next one will look at key protections that both of them have in common. The sources of Islamic law are very different to those we find in IHL. The Islamic Law of War is known as Sayar, and the Quran and Sunnah constitute primary sources and are considered eternal, immutable, and unchanging, revolving as they do around God's divine nature and revelation. The secondary sources are based on opinion, rai, and are ijma, scholarly consensus, and qiyas, analogy. IHL, on the other hand, is conventional, in the form of the Geneva Conventions, additional protocols, and treaties regulating the conduct of hostilities, as well as customary international humanitarian law. Unlike IHL and Islamic law on the use of force, Islamic law does not distinguish between the reasons for going to war and conduct in that war. Muslim scholars instead assert that Islamic just war implies satisfying both the criteria for going to war as well as conduct in accordance with the regulatory principles enshrined in the Sharia. Also, IHL applies once there is an armed conflict which can be international or non-international. An international armed conflict occurs when there is a difference between states which leads to the intervention of their armed forces. A non-international armed conflict occurs when there is protracted armed violence between an organized armed group and a state or another armed group. The classification for international and non-international armed conflicts under the Islamic Laws of War, on the other hand, are religious. Non-international armed conflicts occur between groups of Muslims, whereas international conflicts occur between Muslims and non-Muslims. It seems that the threshold for the application of the Islamic Laws of War in an international armed conflict is once weapons have been used and armed forces have been deployed. Meanwhile, for non-international armed conflicts, once it rises to the level of belligerency, the Islamic laws of war apply. This is after reconciliation is sought, as the Quran states that all believers are but brothers, therefore Muslims should seek reconciliation between themselves. There is significant variance in the threshold for application of IHL and the Islamic laws of war, but as we will see in the next video, many principles remain the same.